you can pick up extra shifts, of course, to try and save and save and save. But again, you can only do so much, right? Um, if you have a family, if you have kids, you can cut back, you can limit, but there's only so far you can go, right? I do very much recommend for people, though, even if you're just in application mode or even pre-application mode, I absolutely recommend taking a look at your spending. Nobody likes the word budget, but take a look at your spending and figure out, like, where is your money actually going? It can be extremely eye-opening to start recognizing and realizing, oh, wow, I didn't realize we were spending that much more on this specific thing. And
a daily dose of inspiration from a CRNA School Prep Academy student. I have been waiting to write this post for a few years now, 3 to be exact. I finally got accepted to CRNA school. Thank you so much to CSBA for everything. I have been a member for 3 years and went to 2 conferences, which was super helpful. I also did 2 mock interviews. I then did the 5-day interview boot camp 3 separate times as well. Here's my story. This has been a lifelong dream of mine since I was 13 years old. My GPA was a 3.2, so not the best, and I refused to take the GRE because I don't feel standardized tests should be used to determine the quality level of a student. I worked at a busy level 1 trauma center for 6 years and was a part of every committee possible. I also had my CCRN, my TNCC. I was charge nurse and a preceptor. I took grad level biochemistry course from Oregon State as well. I applied to over 7 different schools and only got 2 interviews. Rejection was not fun over and over again, and after a failed interview in January, I almost gave up. CSBA helped me so much and gave me the motivation to keep pursuing my dreams. Moral of the story, do not give up. I just love this story so very much. So dear future CRNA, you know who you are. Congratulations. I'm so incredibly proud of you. If you're not already subscribed to our free Future CRNA newsletter, be sure to do so now. Pause this episode and click the link in the show notes or comments below. Cheers to your future. Now back to the show. All right, welcome back to CSBA's podcast. I'm your host, Jenny Finnell. So the question today is how to pay for CRNA school. And we have a very special guest, Natalie Kratzer. Welcome, Natalie.
thank you. Good to be here.
Yes, so nice. It's been too long, I will say. And for those of you who are CSBA members, you recognize Natalie's name. She has been working with us, since the beginning. In fact, back in 2019, I originally reached out to Natalie because I had been mentoring students inside our Facebook community. And a common pain point was, how do I pay for CRNA school? How do I pay back all these loans? Am I going to be in debt for the rest of my life? And, and it's funny because I was like, well, I can share my story and my experience, but I am in no means a financial consultant, but I'll share. So I did that, but I was like, I know I need someone who has more expertise, who can really help in this area, because I want to make sure that I'm not misguiding anyone down the wrong path. And I know, as well as I do, that who you take advice from is really critical in your success in a lot of things in life. And no one means harm by giving you misadvice, but it's just the natural course of not everyone knows everything and they can speak from their own experience, but sometimes that's very limited viewpoint. Exactly. So Natalie brings a wealth of knowledge to you guys. She actually has a sister-in-law who's a CRNA, and that's how she has become very passionate. And she pretty much exclusively works with CRNAs and SRNAs only. She also works with York College and works with those students. And so she is just a wealth of information. She knows your story. She knows what you're up against. She knows what, the financials look like after school. So today, again, we're going to discuss how to pay for CRNA school and some of the things maybe to watch out for, and some of the common questions that Natalie gets from SRNAs and nurses who are pursuing this career path. So welcome.
Thank you so very much. And it has been so much fun watching CSPA grow and become the most amazing possible way for nurses to truly understand what this journey looks like to getting into school and becoming a CRNA. So glad to be a part of it.
Yes, honestly, so grateful to have you too. Yeah. And you're right. You've been getting around from the beginning, and it's going on almost 3 years coming in 2023, which
crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's crazy. But so let's go ahead and get into the good stuff. So today we're going to discuss, again, like I said, some common questions that students tend to ask. And again, we do financial quarterly webinars that Natalie hosts inside of CRNA's Corp Academy for our students. So if you are a CSBA student, you will have access to these quarterly webinars. So make sure to mark your calendar. We will announce the 2023 schedule here relatively soon. I was telling Natalie before we came on here, I was hoping by the end of October to know 2023 because it's a huge resource, you guys. You can go on these webinars, ask her questions. I mean, that's amazing that you have a financial consultant to talk to prior to school. So she, again, don't hesitate to ever ask questions. But let's kind of get into, how do you pay for CRNA school and all of the living expenses that go with it?
Yes. And that's exactly that extra little piece you added on there. That's the piece that often gets people, right? So, there's tuition, there's some of the other fees and expenses that come along with school itself, the program, but then there's all those living expenses as well. And just as Jenny shared in the intro, every single one of you is coming to school in a different circumstance with a different set of maybe baggage, to use a not nice word, but everybody is so different. And so that's where it can be kind of dangerous to just take somebody else's word for it, even if on the surface they look like kind of similar to where you are coming from. You don't really know what's going on in the background with their finances or how they grew up with money or any of those kinds of things. So very important to just, take it for what it is for you and for your family and your situation. So there's really, I kind of broke this out for today in two different sections. There's kind of like the traditional ways to pay for school. So we'll start with that. And then there's some kind of more non-traditional ways as well. So traditional ways, the very first one that almost everybody thinks of is federal student loans, which of course has been a major hot topic in the news here as of late. So federal student lending is very different at the graduate school level than for undergraduate. So if I had $1 for every time I heard a nurse say, I have no idea what I'm doing with regard to loans, you are not alone if you don't know. It's like a whole different animal at the grad level. So there's really, I'm going to keep this a little bit high level just because we want to give you a little bit of all the parts today, right? So there's two basic types of federal student graduate loans. The first is the unsubsidized direct loan. And the second is the Grad Plus loan. And so these loans are very easy for a student to get. You're completing the FAFSA, the free application for student aid. And that is basically all you got to do in order to get eligibility for that type of lending. So there's no credit check. You don't need a co-signer, things of that nature aren't going to cause any kind of hiccups for you. There's a few extra little things here and there, and you do need to be a U.S. citizen, and some things like that do come into play. So depending again on your situation, the piece with the federal student lending that sometimes really makes people go, "Ooh, do I want to go that route?" is that they do have set interest rates. So those reset every July 1st, and that interest rate then stays put for the whole following year. They also come with origination fees. So it's almost like a fee to be able to take the loan itself. And that fee actually gets added to your principal. So when the interest starts accruing, it's accruing on not just the amount that you took, but the amount that you took plus that origination fee. And so that can be the part where it feels a little yucky sometimes. Now, we've been in this administrative forbearance for feels like forever now. We are kind of thinking this most recent extension will be it. So that is supposed to sunset here starting in January of 23. So at that point, interest will start accruing. Some of you, and I'll bring this up here in a little while as well, some of you may be familiar from undergrad. If you had subsidized loans don't accrue interest while you're in deferment. That doesn't exist for graduate school loans. So for graduate, it'll all be accruing, again, outside of this administrative forbearance that we're in. That'll start right away. So just to give you an idea, rates here this year for the federal direct are 6.54%. The origination fee is 1.057. And then for the Grad Plus, it's a whole percent higher, 7.54%. And the origination fee is quite a bit higher at 4.228. So yes, exactly. Ooh, that's the one that a lot of times when we can with planning that we're doing with students, we're trying to often avoid that one where and when we can.
Yeah.
Can feel
Ooh.
kind of nasty.
Yeah. And honestly, 6.54%. When I went, it was over 8%. So that even, I know it's been lower than that even in the past years. And the fact that the students who have been in school for the last few years have had no interest is amazing. Kind of a backstory. I paid on my undergrad. I had about close to $90,000 of undergrad debt when I went into CRNA school. And I had paid on them the minimum payments, granted, mind you, because I was making like $55,000 a year. I had a ton, I couldn't afford to pay more than the minimum. So I did that for 3 years by the time I started school. And then I deferred them. When about a year from graduation, I went and looked at my loans and realized I owed over 100% of my loans and like that I'd been paying on because all the interest came back. So essentially all the payments I made are just gone. I remember crying because I was like, oh my gosh, 3 years of paying on my loans just completely knocked out in 1 year of having interest accrue. It was, but the thing is, if you don't have a choice, you don't have a choice, but you're right. When you have to pay attention to the interest rate, 6% may not seem big, but when you're talking 50, 60,000 plus dollars, it is significant.
It adds up fast. Yeah. And same with that origination fee. It's like, man, it just, it just builds and builds and builds upon itself. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, and so the alternative to federal loans, then, sticking with the sort of traditional ways to pay for school, private loans are another option that are out there. Now, I will say private loans are not going to have some of the benefits that we've seen with this administrative forbearance here over the last few years. So, and I know a few students who have been sort of kicking themselves a little bit because they're like, man, I took a private loan and my private loan didn't get the deferral that everybody's been seeing, the 0% that we've seen for the last few years. At the same time, their rates are probably locked in a lot lower because, like you said, for the last few years, rates have been so much lower. And so, yes, it's not been at 0, but when the forbearance ends, they're going to be at maybe 3% instead of a 6 or a 7. So, private loans are definitely an option. You do have to have, in almost every case, you will need a cosigner. A private lender is not going to approve you all by your loan sum without income, since majority of programs you're probably not working or working extremely minimally. And so, you're going to want a very strong cosigner. And what I mean by strong, good credit score, good debt to income ratio. Those are kind of your two biggies. And when it comes to a cosigner, a lot of people automatically think that needs to be mom, dad, spouse. Could be. I would say those are probably the typical people, but there are also, other loved ones or just really strong people in your life who are willing to invest in you in that way. And when I say invest in you, I think sometimes people think that there is like a straight up monetary thing that they need to be doing. Probably not for a cosigner, because really the cosigner is just the person who, if you happen to default on those loans, that's who the lending institution is going to come back to. And let's be real, most of you are going to graduate with jobs and good jobs. So the possibility of you actually defaulting is probably very slim to none. So I always say, if you can, take a look at the private loans. I was looking actually just last night with a student. She's in year 2 and some circumstances changed for them. And they've decided they're going to take some loans where they weren't going to initially. And she is married, so she's got a really good, strong cosigner. And we were taking a look at a health professions private loan. There's a handful of those out there from different lenders. And there are variable rate offers as well as fixed rate offers. Again, those are things you're going to want to talk to a professional about to understand what's the difference between those. But given both options that they were looking at from this one lender, it could have been as low as 4% and change up to 9% and change without origination fees. So even if it's the same 7.54% that the Grad Plus is at, there's no origination fee attached to that. So it is actually cheaper, right? And with private student lending, you're still going to have that deferral while you're in school. So you don't have any of those kinds of, issues where you need to start making payment right away or anything like that.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I would, one of my private loans, I remember getting this letter saying you have to start making payments. I'm like, wait, no. And it's because when I went
I
to
remember
clinical,
this. Yeah.
yeah, I dropped below whatever they considered a full-time student in school. They didn't understand that I was in clinical. And so it was not a big deal. It stressed me out at the time, but I called my program director. I'm like, I need help. So he wrote me a letter, and the program director himself wrote a letter stating that I was a full-time, essentially resident, and that I was technically full-time because of the residency. And they put me back in deferral, no problem. But it was stressful nonetheless. But yeah, private loans. I've always used a lot of private loans because, like you said, as long as you have good credit. My husband worked in school, so I don't remember. He must have, but I don't remember. Those are the things that I don't remember. But I know we mostly took out private loans. I took out all the government loans I could get, but we also took out private loans. But when I was done, my private loans were like the best interest rates. They were like the 2.5 or 3, or my government loans were 8. So as soon as I was done, well, not as soon, because I didn't think about this until like after a year and a half after school, which was a mistake. But I finally reconsolidated all my government loans into private loans to cut my interest rate in half, and set it on a 5-year payment plan and set it and forget it. And they're gone now. So yeah. So
yeah, you make a really good point that I actually wanted to, or reminded me of something I wanted to share with, you kind of said it on the side. So one thing with the private lending, sometimes students don't understand, is that the private lender is going to talk to your financial aid department. So it's not like a whole separate thing over here. So your financial aid department is still going to say, yes, private student lender, they are here, they are a student, and they do qualify for lending when it's a true student loan. Sometimes people will take other kinds of loans to pay for school. That would be outside of that. But when you're doing a private student loan, they are going to communicate back and forth. So I just like for people to understand how that works.
I think that's a great point. Cause I was shocked that they knew that I dropped below, because they really were communicating with my college that Jenny's now only taking 8 credit hours. I'm like, but I have all the clinical. So yeah, they do chat. Awesome. So people always ask this question too: what should I have in savings prior to starting school?
Yeah, it's such a, we joke a little bit in our world, and in the financial planning world, there's so many it depends answers, and this is for sure an it depends answer, because for sure cash is another way to be able to pay for school, right? I do have a decent amount of students who come to us, and they have been able to, through whatever circumstances, just save a boatload of money, or they've chosen one of those programs that is much further down on the expense scale for the actual program itself. And so sometimes I've got people who they're like, nope, I'm not going to take any loans. Here we are. I'm just going to pay for it. Right.
Nice.
So it really depends on what your circumstances are leading up. And, a few things that I thought of, or that I run into, I should say, with students leading up to school is, where the travel money is not what it was a few years ago, right? So that looks very different for my students today than it did 2 years ago or even a year ago. So that can limit, you can pick up extra shifts, of course, to try and save and save and save. But again, you can only do so much, right? If you have a family, if you have kids, you can cut back, you can limit, but there's only so far you can go, right? I do very much recommend for people, though, even if you're just in application mode or even pre-application mode, I absolutely recommend taking a look at your spending. Nobody likes the word budget, but take a look at your spending and figure out, like, where is your money actually going? It can be extremely eye-opening to start recognizing and realizing, oh, wow, I didn't realize we were spending that much more on this specific thing. And
$300 a month on Starbucks.
Right. Yeah. Everybody, Starbucks and Amazon get picked on all the time. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it is a thing, right? Everybody has kind of their place where we call them spending leaks, where the money just sort of seems to just keep dripping out and dripping out and dripping out. So take a look at what that is for you. And then, I mean, really, how do you save? You spend less money than what's coming in the door. It's not rocket science, right? But it is hard. I get that it is hard. And so, do what you can to save as much as you can. A big piece to that too is, what are you coming in with in terms of debts, right? Again, like you just shared, you had the undergrad debt of and a decent chunk hanging out there.
Mhm.
And oftentimes we'll have, again, all the different circumstances, right? So we may have people who just went through a divorce,
Mm.
and divorces are expensive. We may have people who got stuck with a house and couldn't sell it. That wasn't a thing for a few years, but we're starting to get back to that again. So there's all these different things. I absolutely 100% believe that if you've got any kind of higher interest rate loans hanging out there, kind of ignore undergrad student loans for a minute. I'll come back to that. But if you've got credit cards for sure, cars, any of those kind of bills that are not going to stop when
Mhm.
you go to school, right? Credit card company doesn't care that you went to school. They're still going to be looking for their payment.
Right.
And those often have those high interest rates where,
Mhm.
oh my gosh, if those sit for 3 years and you're just making minimums, talk about really getting nasty, right? It's worse than what you described with your undergrad
Oh yeah.
debt. So absolutely take care of those first and foremost, and then look to figure out if you can save. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to put money in the bank that you're
Mhm.
saving I mean, we're starting to see interest go up a little bit on, high yield savings and things like that. But still, I think high yield savings are averaging right around 2.15 right now, somewhere in that ballpark. Well, that's nothing if you've got 22% interest on a credit card.
Right.
So yeah. So I definitely encourage you to take care of the debts first and then come back and focus on the savings. Undergrad student lending, or excuse me, undergrad outstanding loans and things. That one can go back and forth because your story is a really great example of like, oh man, would have been nice if you could have paid that off before school. But like you said, you couldn't. That just wasn't a reality at the time for you and your situation. And a lot of people are in that same boat. So of all the things that you have to let go and not pay off prior to school, undergrad loans absolutely are the thing because those are going to be able to be deferred once
Mhm.
you're a full-time student again. I think it's great if you can pay them off, but of all the things, leave those.
Mhm.
And then again, if you think about, okay, do I save money or pay off my undergrad student loans? Some people will be in different camps on this, but I look at, again, the interest rate. What's the cost of the money that you're borrowing? So if your undergrad loans have like okay interest rates comparatively to what we just talked about with the rates on graduate school loans and the origination fee on graduate school loans, might make more sense for you to put a little extra money in the bank so you're taking less graduate school loan
Mhm.
and let your lower interest rate undergrad loan grow on you a little bit.
Mhm. Yeah,
Does that make
100%.
sense?
No, that makes sense. And I guess the way I
Yeah.
always felt, and we didn't have a lot. I think we managed to save close to 10,000, but granted, when we didn't have kids, we had a dog. He was high maintenance. Had a lot of vet bills. He had a immunocompromised. He was always at the vet. And I had an old car. I had a 12-year-old Nissan Sentra that, I called her Old Betty. She was routinely falling in rust. She's a rust bucket. She sat out at Ohio State for 5 years. So anyways, but we did our best. We cut cable. We never bought food. We never went out to eat unless like we got taken out to dinner from like my in-laws or my parents for like birthdays. So
Right.
we cut back as much as we could that way. But the savings, the reason why I think some cash is nice is because the unexpected will happen. And yes, you should have credit cards, but as Natalie spoke to, don't carry balances on those credit cards that you can't pay off because the interest rate is astronomically high. So for me, the cash was like my, my fund of like, oh no, what am I going to do? I have to have this $2,000 charge. And I have to have a way to pay the credit card. So I kind of kept the cash as reserves for if I had to make a charge. The beauty of a credit card is it gives you an entire extra month to pay for it. Kind of gives you more time, and then you earn points, which I love my credit card point because it's some way to cut back, get some money back at the end of the year. It could be a couple $100, but that's still a couple $100. So we kept some cash, but I'll tell you right now, I was only in school for 27 months and I blew through that 10 grand to the point where when we were done with school, now granted, part of it was I committed to being in a wedding, which she was my best friend. In fact,
So hard.
Deanna, who helps with
Yeah.
CSBA. Yeah. I was her maid of honor. I was like, I cannot say no to my best friend of like, since we've been friends for almost over 2 decades now. So it was that important to me. So I spent money that I shouldn't have spent to go to an out of state wedding and all that other stuff. But all that being said, I had to make choices on how I spent that money. And when I was done with school, I remember my first paycheck wasn't going to be till like the end of October, and I graduated in August. We luckily had good credit. I had a Discover card that I opened that was 0% interest for 18 months. When I opened the card, took out, you can pay yourself a check with almost credit cards, you can write yourself a check. So I wrote myself a check, Jenny Finnell, 10 grand, the maxing out, and it's 18 months. And here you go, Mr. Chase Bank, cash it. And so they did. And we lived off that 10 grand until I got my first paycheck. But then essentially my first few paychecks was like, let's pay off this credit card.
You're exactly right. And that's, so one of the things my team and I do with students who work with us one-on-one is we have a thing we call the semester breakdown. And we literally lay out the 9 semesters, or some programs are structured slightly differently, but the 9 semesters or your quarters. And we say, okay, what's the cost for this semester? What do we think your living expenses are going to look like? Are you going to have clinical travel and housing that we got to figure out? What are all the things? And then we figure out what assets do we have to be able to pay for it? Do we have savings? Are we going to be able to take private loans? Do we have the lucky ones who have maybe gifts coming from family or whatever it may be? And we start to map that out, because what you just explained, we tell our students all the time, we don't want you to get to the end of the program and have nothing, because you got to take boards, you got to get credentialed. Yes. Like those things take forever. And then you have your time till the first paycheck actually gets into your bank. So ideally, and this is why Jenny and I do what we do now, right? Like we want people to learn from the mistakes we've seen.
Yeah. Don't do as I say, or what is it? Don't do as I do.
Right. Do as I say, not as I did. Yeah. So those are all things that we need to look at. And, I just realized we didn't share some of the non-traditional ways to pay for school.
Oh yeah.
And I'll talk just super high level, but, as we're laying that map out for people, we're plugging those things in as they come up. So, one thing, there are lots of programs and or hospital systems and or anesthesia groups out there that are actually offering money to students very early on in their programs. I call them front-loaded sign-on bonuses, where you're committing before school starts or maybe a year into school to go work for that program later. So it's not something you do lightly, right?
100%. Thank you for saying that.
Yep.
Talk to Sarahs that work there, by the way. Hint, hint, wink, wink. Don't
100%. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Do not go blindly into that one. But yeah, that can be a great way. I've got students that are getting stipends every month. I have one student, he's going to graduate with more money in savings than he started the program.
Oh my gosh.
Just by way of some scholarships he got, the stipends, some sign-on bonuses. It's amazing. Military is another option that can be very, very similar. And again, not for everybody, right?
Right.
That's a commitment that you're making. But for sure, that can provide a really amazing income stream to you. And, the program, oh my gosh, just, can be very, very incredible from a financial standpoint. But again, know what you're walking into. And then the last one that I didn't mention is using home equity. It's starting to look a little different with this current rising interest rate environment that we're in. But I do often have students, usually it's ones who are coming into a program after working more than just a couple years, right? Most of those are people who've had a home for maybe 10 years, 15 years, been able to plow a lot of money towards their mortgage. So, and with the last couple of years, we've seen equity go up significantly in a lot of areas around our country, most areas around our country. And so you now have quite a bit of money that you can access via your house and that equity that you've built up. So that can be another way to take a look at alternative ways to get money to pay for school. Again, looks a little different. Those home equity lines of credit or HELOCs, the rates on those today are not what they were 6 months ago even. So again, do your homework, talk to experts, make sure you know what you're walking into and how it compares to the other options. But that can be another really great way to consider paying for school if you have that means.
Okay. No, those are all great. I'm glad you pointed all those out. I took a stipend when I was in school. And as Natalie spoke to, I was about a year into my program and I had a job. You find out about these things, you guys, you're probably like, how do I know this? It's just word of mouth, going to clinical and talking to CRNAs, talking to other students. I've always spoken how important networking is. This is a small community. you'd be surprised. You can pretty much find anyone, anywhere in the entire country just by asking someone if they know someone who knows someone. And so that's really, really key to find these little contracts. That being said, I did not take that stipend without first talking to CRNAs who work there, talking to SRNAs who rotated there. It was because it was a hospital that I actually didn't rotate at ever. I actually requested to rotate there, and I did get to go rotate there because I wanted to see it before I committed. And I knew that they would be able to do what I wanted, which was to do open heart after I graduate. So I took that knowing they'd be able to support me in the way I needed. And it was a great decision, but I equally know people who went into the same stipend who broke that contract because they weren't happy there. And trust me when I say they'll come after that money and interest sometimes too. So
yes. Have somebody read those contracts. Who knows and can understand employment contracts, because I've seen some very, very interesting ones over the last several years in particular. And you're absolutely right. Some of them they want the money paid back in a super crazy short amount of time with a boatload of interest. And others are a little more forgiving, but know what you're walking into.
Yeah.
Great advice, Jenny.
Yeah. They'd have lawyers that come after you for sure. So yeah, it just can get ugly. Ooh.
Yeah.
All right. So the next question I would love to hear your thoughts on is, we kind of talked about, cash savings, but I know when I mentioned I saved about 10,000. How much would you say you would see on average students enter CRNA school with in cash savings?
Yeah, I would say probably the average may be a little higher than what you were able to do. Probably around 50 or 40 or 50 is probably average.
Wow.
Again, I certainly have clients who walk in with nothing. None at all.
Right.
Scares me a little bit, but we figure it out. And then I have others who, like I said earlier, walk in with such an amount that they can pay for the program in its entirety with cash. And so it really is all over the place. But I definitely agree with kind of how you shared your story. I really prefer when students can walk in with some kind of liquid cash on hand, at least as an emergency fund, if nothing else. A lot of the rule of thumb kind of things that you might see on the internet or TikTok or whatever, they kind of go out the window for you all once you're students, because you're in such a different situation. And I've said that so many times that the planning we do for our SRNAs might, if a colleague of mine who had no idea the SRNA experience was sitting next to me and listening to the advice I was giving, they'd be like, what?
Yeah, exactly.
What is she talking about? Because it's just so different. We have to plan very, very differently for the short-term little hiccup on the career journey. And then also to make sure that we're ready, because we know what it's going to look like for the most part, right? After school and once that paycheck starts coming in. So all sorts of different things. But that rule of thumb for emergency savings is typically 3 to 6 months worth of your expenses. And I'd say that's probably still an okay goal for you planning for school. But again, not everybody's going to be able to do that,
right?
Especially depending on your ramp, right? If you applied with what I hear that I love these stories. So many CSPA students have these stories. I just applied because they told me to just get the application in, and all of a sudden I got an interview, and all of a sudden I got an acceptance. Whoo, never expected it,
exactly.
right? So and sometimes that can be hard to turn it down, right? You got that offer. So, and I know Richard, I've heard him talk so many times about this too. He and I are very much on the same page. Does it make sense to wait and delay that CRNA income for a whole nother year? For most people, probably not. I've had a small handful where when we dug in, again, based on certain family situations and things, it made sense for them to defer. But for most people, the cost of waiting is much more expensive than the cost of just buckling down and figuring it out and getting through it.
Yes. Yep. That was our situation. I was we didn't have a lot of money. I graduated when the last kind of recession took place, which was 2008 or 2009. Correct. I don't remember. It was whenever. Yep. And my poor husband, he didn't have a job for the most part. And so I graduated and I was like, I'm your sugar mama. I didn't plan for this to work out that way. And it was hard. We paid for our own wedding, which was back then I even thought we paid $30,000. We had to pay off. We couldn't get any family help. So we had that. So yeah, we did the best we could, but I think 3 to 6 months would be amazing. And honestly, now that I know what I've seen back in the pandemic, when the pandemic happened and the ORs were shut down for however long,
yes,
I remember thinking, why, Jenny? Like, because we had the ability to set aside months of income. And I just never, my wildest dreams, right? Nobody in their wildest dreams ever thought or would ever think that their job is just going to be like, poof, you can't come in today. Like, what?
Right.
What?
Right.
We're necessary. It was just like, no, you're not. That's a carpal tunnel. That you're not necessary. So it was just like crazy to me to feel like, wow, I never, my wildest dreams thought as a CRNA, I would ever not be needed. And luckily that only lasted, I worked at a surgery center because a lot of my colleagues who were at level 1 trauma centers, they sped up. They didn't take a pay cut at all. But I worked at a surgery center. So yeah, I think 3 to 6 months is just, whether you're in CRNA school or not, it's a really good standard to set just in general.
Absolutely.
And if you can't, just do the best you can, it'll be okay. And like Natalie said, somebody's just got to strap in and for the ride, and you can figure it out. It's going to be, you're not. And then also one thing that I noticed when I was in school, which was hard, because you see your classmates who do have more money, who, like I said, one of my classmates and good friend of mine, she had, I don't know what her parents call it. When parents have funds for their children? I don't even have one of those.
Probably a 529 plan. Yeah. There's a few different things.
It was some kind of like savings account or something. I don't know.
Okay.
Anyways, she was getting funds from that. I don't know.
Like a trust fund or something.
Yeah, like a trust fund. Thank you. I couldn't think of the term. And then my other friend, again, she had been a nurse for over 10 years. And so she had a good savings. They were like going and buying all these things and Starbucks. And I'm thinking like, oh, I got nickels. Like I can't do that. And so it's hard when you play the comparison game, you're like, well, if they can afford it, I should afford it, but it's just not the case. Yeah. So keep it in mind, just because some of your classmates are in a different situation, as hard as it is to say, I want to go out and go to the dinner with you guys and go to the sushi restaurant, but that's just not my budget. Maybe go hang out and get a drink, but then go home. Or, it does stink when you can't participate in certain things because you just can't afford it. But that's just the reality, is sometimes you're going to see your classmates not have the same situation as you, and you're just going to have to smile and get through it.
Absolutely. And sometimes, I hate to say this, but sometimes the people who you see spending money actually don't have it either. And yeah. And so they're actually getting themselves into deeper and deeper, uglier, murkier waters sometimes, because they don't have the ability to do what you just said, and create a boundary for themselves. So yeah, I mean, thankfully, most of you are too busy to like have to make those decisions anyway when you're in school. But
yeah. I remember I tried when I was in school. What is it called? It was called Stitch Fix. It was like the big fad back then. I think it's still around, but like I was like, ooh, I don't have time to shop anymore. I'm gonna have it sent to my doorstep. That was a huge mistake. I think after like the second box, I canceled. I'm like, I do not have the money for this, and like this is just dangerous, right? So it is just so hard because especially for nurses who have been working for 4 or 5 years and they're so used to their spending habits.
That's the hard part.
Yeah, to change that, it's like you created this habit of like you're used to being able to spend $500 a month on play money, right? Concerts, dinners, buying new tops, new clothes, new hats, new shoes. Like sometimes you're gonna have to let your shoes just wear out before you get your next pair.
Absolutely. And I mean, I don't think she'd mind me sharing this. My sister-in-law and my brother, they used to say, yep, we lived on frozen meatballs and pancakes for 3 years. Like, and you figure out where you can back off. But also, again, not to continue kind of beating this dead horse, but, travel nursing, so many were travel nursing and you really didn't have to think about the money, right? It was just coming in and you were fine for the most part. And so that's, again, why I say, take a look at the spending as soon as CRNA is even a thing, right? That it's even in your plan at all, start to back yourself down slowly. It feels so much better when you can ease into it, as opposed to that like slamming into the wall, like, holy cow, there's no money coming in. What do I do now? Right. Especially my single people, and in particular, if you don't have any, I have quite a few who are able to move back in with mom and dad, or, move in with a brother or somebody like that. But for those who are completely on their own, can be very jarring. So start early and just figure out what are the things that actually don't mean as much to you as getting to CRNA. Right. I say it that way. Yes. Yeah. No, and then the other thing too with that is, if you don't have a lot of savings, any of the things you're spending or income from a spouse or somebody else during school, anything you spend money on, it better be important enough to you to know that you're paying interest on that money because you're taking in a loan. So it
Good
didn't
point.
just cost this much, it cost this much because it had an origination fee maybe, and it's accruing interest for 3 years.
Good
So,
point.
I hate to harp on the budget thing, but it's important.
Yeah. Mint's a good app, you guys. If you're not familiar with Mint, I think it's pretty popular these days, but it allows you to see where your money's going because you're like, whoa,
Yes.
Amazon, hey, it allows you to see exactly what you're spending your money on in categories, which is nice. But yeah, I agree. Easing into it's better. I know, like for me, I was still in couponing mode because we never had a lot of money even prior to school. So like for me, it didn't really feel like a big deal to cut because we were already penny pinching. We were already couponing. We were already cognizant of what we were spending because we didn't have a lot of money prior to starting school. Like I spoke to, I drove my car was 14 years old when I was done with school. My husband, same thing, had a paid off car, which, so again, we were already really frugal
Right.
prior. So it didn't feel like a giant slap in the face prior to school. Although the Stitch Fix thing, I occasionally have little moments like that where I'm like, I could be cool. And I'm like, wait, Penny, I'm not cool. I can't do that. Not yet. Maybe someday. And then you just kind of hold out. But, and I love the fact that, you're going to, mention the fact that, everyone's situation is different. And let's maybe talk about what other factors should they consider when considering how much cash they should have. You mentioned travel expenses, and whether they can live with mom. I know I lived with my parents for a few days out of the week for the first few months of the program because I was traveling 2 hours away, just go to class 4 times a week. So instead of getting a hotel, I shacked up with mom and dad again when I was in my 20s. It was kind of nice. They made me food. It was nice.
Yeah, definitely. I think, looking at things like that, where can I cut back? Are there ability to move in with mom and dad? Are there abilities to room with somebody else from the program? I actually even have 2 clients who are going to 2 different programs that are in the same town, but they knew each other from nursing. Yeah, from ICU experience. And they're rooming together because they're like, hey, we're both right here, and we can save. So
perfect.
Any of those kinds of things that you can look at. But yet again, I've got plenty of students who are coming to the program with kids, right? And a little harder to room with mom and dad or room with a roommate when you got kiddos.
Yeah, exactly.
But I know, yes, also the fur babies, correct. But I know, considering the cost of the program, considering the cost of living where your program is. I know, Jenny, you have that amazing resource that talks about the lower cost programs, that list that's out there. Look at those things and think through, is this in an area where I have people I can live with? Is this in an area where I'm not going to have to commute as far? The ability to graduate and survive the program is much more important than, I know you've said this before, I still feel funny saying it though, but it's more important than the name that's on the degree, right? You got to be able to pass boards. That's the bottom line. And so if your program costs 120 or 30,000, it doesn't matter. Nobody cares.
Yes, exactly. And I'm glad you brought that up because so many people get humbled. Well, that school's ranked. That school's this. They have the name, right? The prestige. It does not matter, you guys. You are a CRNA. What matters more to any hospital system, to any CRNA you're going to work with, is who are you and how would I work with you? Are you going to show up? Are you going to offer me a break? Are you going to be a team player? That matters. I don't care whether you went to Puerto Rico, Akron, Yale, Harvard. Oh, one of my lights just went out. Anyways, okay. So anyways, so just be cognizant of that. I'm not saying don't go to a top name school if that's really in your dream, to do, or if you can afford it, or, whatever it makes sense, but don't pick it based on that and take on way more debt than you would have otherwise just because of the name.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I love all that. And I know we already touched on, whether you should be off undergrad before you go back to school. And I think that just depends, like you said, to kind of look at the numbers, what makes sense, interest rate wise. For me, it makes sense to defer because I had too much anyways. And I equally think that despite some debt, you should still have some cash because you could accumulate debt unexpectedly on a credit card, which you want to be able to pay.
Correct.
And I'm guilty of this. And I'm not saying you should do it. I'm just saying it's survival mode and I can survive. I equally watch my parents do this. I love you, mom and dad. But, my mom would, do that whole, she would bounce checks to different banks. And so other checks wouldn't bounce. I'm not saying do that, but I did that with my credit cards. And it was like, it's funny how much you take from your own childhood, what you see and what you learn, you bring it into your adult world.
Time.
I know it's not okay, but I did it even in my undergrad years to survive, where back then it was really easy to get credit. So I'd open a credit card, I do the 0%, 18 months, charge it up, open a new credit card, transfer the balance, and then away I went. And I'm not saying that that's what you should do, but at the end of the day, the reason why you need cash is because you don't want to get yourself in a situation, because it can get really ugly really fast, especially if you don't have good credit. Yeah. Absolutely. And it's hard to recover credit too. But let's kind of change mode just for our last question, because this is another thing that I know you get asked a lot too, is what do students do? Oh, before I get off topic, I thought of something I just remembered. So if you're looking for a job in school, I'm not saying you want to work full time, but I have an amazing opportunity that I just want to take this moment to spread right now. And one of the reasons why I started NTN, or Nurses Teach Nurses, is because one of the things we had been doing inside CRNA School Prep Academy was I was essentially hiring current students to mentor by doing mock interviews, essay edits, resume edits. Because you guys, I'm one person. There is over 2,000 of you guys inside CSBA. I could not handle you all. I love you, but I couldn't do it. I'm one person. So I was like, well, why not have the students do it? They clearly made it. They know what it takes to be successful in your resume, essay, interview. And it has worked out beautifully to where now we open Nurses Teach Nurses, and you can go apply, become a service provider, and mentor and give back. And most students find this incredibly rewarding. It's flexible. You can do an hour here, hour there. I mean, some of these students are earning $1,000 a month in school.
That's awesome.
I know. And maybe they're doing 8 mock interviews. I mean, it's just 1 a week, 2 a week, whatever they can fit in. It's just an hour of their time versus committing to an 8-hour shift at the hospital. So it's huge. So I'm just saying, go check out Nurses Teach Nurses. But let's get into the last question, which is, what are your options for health insurance while in CRNA school?
So options for health insurance, again, everybody coming into this with different circumstances, right? So I'll just kind of give the overall rundown on all the possibilities that could exist depending on where you're at. So some of you are coming in super young, just have to say it that way, right? 26 or under. If you are age 26 or under, you could still have the ability to be on mom or dad's insurance through their employer, which can be huge. Now, the one thing that can be a little challenging is oftentimes if I'm seeing students come into the program with that ability, at some point during the program, they're aging out of that. So if that is you, I just always recommend get the details on when you're going to get sort of booted from that. So with some insurance, employer plan insurance, it could be the month in which you turn 26. It could be the day you turn 26. It could be the end of the year in which you turn 26. So just know what it is so you can be prepared. But that's for sure an option. Another option, of course, maybe goes without saying, but sometimes people forget, if you are married, look at your spouses. And even if you're not married, but you have a significant other and you two are really, you're cohabitating, you got lots of integration. A lot more employers are offering domestic partner health insurance. I'm seeing it more and more and more, which is absolutely wonderful and beautiful. So that could be an option as well. It may mean you have to go get something notarized, or you have to have a bill with both of your names on it. Again, check with the employer, the HR department, to know what hoop you have to jump through. But definitely an option. Now, a lot of programs do have student health insurance plans. Some don't, just straight up don't have that as an option at all. Some do, some are good, some are a little cringy. Do the math, figure out what it's going to actually cost you. Don't just look at the overarching cost. They usually put it as a per semester, it's going to be X. Well, divide that out by the number of months. Because I have seen some that are well over $400 a month. That's a lot of money for a health insurance plan. One person that may or may not be half decent. Yeah. So know what your deductible is, know what the co-insurance is, know what the actual cost per month is to be able to determine whether or not that student health insurance is reasonable. It will be easy. All you're going to say is, hey, I sign up for this. And also, a lot of times, most times, they just kind of pay that they like wrap it into your tuition. So it gets paid immediately. You don't get a bill. So it doesn't feel like it costs $400 a month because you're not writing a check for 400 a month or, whatever,
Yeah.
but it's still costing you that much. And yet again, I said it earlier, that is now money that is getting accrued interest while you're in school, right? Because it got paid for by a loan. Yeah. So can be good. I have seen some that are quite wonderful. They've got low deductibles and they're not horribly expensive. The other thing with student health insurance is that a lot of times they're going to want you to go to the clinic on campus. Again, some of you, different situations, older students who, not that it's just older students who have health issues, but if you have any kind of health issue like existing already, that may not be your ideal to go to a campus clinic. When you're 19 and in undergrad, it's not usually as big a deal, but right, like when you're a grown adult, that can look and feel
doctor. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Feel very different. So check out all those details. Depending on what state you're going to be living in or where your program is, Medicaid could be a really good option. Now, the challenge with Medicaid is that literally every state is different in how they qualify you, whether it's even there, whether adults can be eligible or just children, but do some research to understand what the options are in the state where you're going to be. If you do have Medicaid available as a possibility, it could be that they're going to be looking at income as a qualifying factor. It could be that they're going to look at income and savings as a qualifying factor. So those are all going to be things that you want to check out and again, understand what the hoops are, what the criteria are. If you're in a school, or excuse me, in a state where Medicaid is an option, there could also be some other helpful things. The SNAP program or food stamps, you may actually be eligible for. I always say these are programs that you paid into, especially if you've lived in that state most of your working years. You've paid into those programs. They're there for you. That's what these are there for. There's also heating. I can't remember what they're called. And every state will call it something different, but there could be stipends that you could actually get towards costs for heating your home as well. So look into all the options that are out there depending on where you live. Medicaid can be a great possibility because it's free.
Yeah. Do they go off? So, because I mean, when you apply to it, they'd probably go by your previous year's taxes. But if you just started school and you have no income because you started school, I feel like it would be unfair to judge you based on the previous year's income.
Thankfully, most do not go based on tax year or tax filed. Yeah. So you don't want to apply though. You don't want to hit that button until you are no longer working. Okay. So wait until you're no longer working. You no longer have income going forward. That's what they'll take a look at.
All right. Awesome. Well, that's good to know.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I think the last option that we typically throw out there, again, not for everybody, but it's this concept of a health share program. These have popped up a little more commonly here over the last few years. It's not health insurance. I always say it's kind of like old school. I have one of my clients, she calls it the farmer plan because of this analogy that I use. It's like when communities here in the States were first developing, it was almost all farm communities, right? Like a lot of them. And so what would farmers do? They would all throw a little bit of money into the kitty. And if somebody had something happen to a family member or they had a bad crop that year, whatever the situation was, then the farmers collectively would say, okay, the money from the kitty goes to this guy or gal. And so that's kind of how a health share program works. You pay a little bit, a quote unquote premium each month. And you, if you were going to the doctor because you had a cold or something like that, you're just going to be a cash payer. You're going to say, I don't have health insurance. I'm just a cash payer. But if you have a situation where you have a very significant issue arise, whether it's because of an accident or an illness or whatever it may be, as long as typically with most of the programs that I've seen, $500 is the amount, as long as whatever has happened to you is accumulating bills over $500, you're going to end up getting reimbursed for the cost of your issue or test or surgery or whatever it may be. So those can be really handy. I'll throw out a few names. There's a bunch of these, but Christian Healthcare Ministries is one I see a lot. One Share Health, M as in the letter M, Powering Benefits, Altrua Health Share. There's a whole slew of them. Do pay attention though, because some of them are kind of affiliated around sometimes religion. So just pay attention, check out what their criteria are. Some are around other types of criteria. So just, check them out, make sure you understand what boxes you're checking or attesting to before you commit to those. But they can be a nice option if you're not in a Medicaid state, you don't have health insurance through your school. Those can be a really nice alternative.
Yeah. And I guess I can just share my experience. We went through the slew in the last year and a half with private healthcare because, well, back when, I dropped PRNs don't get healthcare insurance. And then my husband, works for us for CSBA. So essentially I'm a small business owner, right? Mostly is what we do. Holy moly. I was like, it was terrible. We've probably changed insurances. We finally have it good. Because I have now we have employees and things like that. But back before I had employees, we were just bouncing healthcare insurance. It was so hard to get someone who genuinely wanted to help you and it would tell you all the things. That was really hard. It was incredibly frustrating. And what I found too, what I had found to be careful is when you pick a plan, what network, like what hospitals, and I had the hardest time with big, like Cleveland Clinic, for example, who's this? We don't know what this is. Nobody knew of these carriers. And so you would spend hours on the phone trying to fight over your bill that should have been paid, but they're like, we don't take this. And it's like, who is this? They billed it wrong. They would bill inappropriately because they've never heard of it before. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So it can be really, really frustrating to get private insurance, but we have been on a health share plan temporarily too. And obviously we were a family, so it was quite expensive. Like $1,000 a month for pretty much nothing. But for one person, $200-$300. The cheapest I found was a couple $100 a month for private healthcare. But that was getting very minimal. But if you're healthy, that's just the reality, unfortunately. But hopefully Medicaid can pull through. That'd be a great option, like Natalie said. And then hopefully your school or your parent or your spouse. Those are obviously the more ideal methods.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Natalie. This was incredibly insightful. And I hope you guys listening today really enjoyed. And I hope this didn't make you feel anxious, because I know we just spewed a lot of stuff, and kind of like money is just one of those things where it affects people differently. Some people shut up and close in. And they're like, oh my gosh, I can't. Other people are like, whatever, it's fine. It's just money. And kind of this is where I've been shifting. Money is a replaceable asset. Time is not. And so when I've come to terms with how, and I'm not saying I have it all figured out by any means, but when I think about going back to CRNA school, you are putting in time and money, but it's so you can have the lifestyle, the career that you want, so you can spend your time the way you want with your family, your loved ones, financially take trips, whatever it may be. That time is irreplaceable. Money is a replaceable asset. And I'm not saying go into debt irresponsibly, but be realistic and run the numbers. I know, for me, when I was making the decision to go back to CRNA school, now mind you, I had $90,000 in debt. So thinking about taking on under 100,000, I was like, whoa. But then I equally knew, I researched and knew CRNAs in my area made about 150, 160,000. This was back in 2009, you guys. I had researched about how much a CRNA make. Now I was making 55,000 as a ICU nurse in Ohio. So I knew I'd be increasing my salary approximately by $100,000. And now more than ever, you're increasing more than that, because I'm telling you right now, just in the last few months, they're shooting up our pay like crazy. They increased my rate by $40 an hour without even asking. I didn't ask, but it was just the competition of the market. We need you. Don't go work for there, work for here. Here's more money. It's like, whoa, okay. So it's crazy right now what we're dealing with, how short hospitals are for CRNAs. Making $180 an hour is not unheard of. Even in a smaller rural area, there's a place in Youngstown, Ohio, that's paying that for a W-2 employee. That's pretty high for Ohio.
For a W-2, especially.
Yeah. We're not Manhattan or anything, and $180 an hour. So not saying that you're guaranteed that, but keep in mind that the money you put in a CRNA school, whether that's $200,000 plus, as long as your debt to income ratio is not over 100% when you're done with school, in my opinion, it's going to be okay to pay it off in a reasonable amount of time, as long as you hook up with Natalie here and plan well for your financial future. So
Absolutely. And I was going to add that too, Jenny. You're 100% right that everybody has these different emotions and feelings when it comes to all of this money stuff. And so I agree. My goal is to not make you more anxious. My goal, my team's goal really is to take the financial stress off. There's so many stressors for all of you when you're in school. That's our goal, is to take the financial stressors off, to know that you've got a partner in the game. You've got somebody who knows what's coming up, can help you when the road turns and gives you a little twist and get you back on a new roadmap, right? And so, please feel free to reach out to us, and we can always share with you how we work with students, the kind of planning that we do. And absolutely, we love being able, I was just sharing with Jenny, we were getting on here, how exciting it is to see the CSPA students graduating and move into all these fun new goals and dreams and see life on the other side of CRNA school.
So Natalie
makes my heart
has
sing.
Worked with like full cohorts of CSPA at this point that are all getting ready to graduate CRNA school. And they're going to continue to go on to work with Natalie to plan for their retirement, plan for what their goals are for retirement. Right. And so you guys, Natalie is a wealth of information. She's a huge resource. I really wish I would have had someone like you back in my ear back in the day. Because holy moly, it is stressful to juggle all this. And that's not a stressor you really should be focused on in school. You should be focused on getting good grades and passing and doing well in clinical versus how am I going to pay, or gosh, this credit card's adding up. What am I going to do? So, how can someone reach out to you? How can they connect with you if they want to kind of learn how they can get going and started with you now?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have a phone number that you can text us at or call us, either way. And that number, I know Jenny will put in the show notes too, but that is 717-954-0032, 717-954-0032. So you can just shoot us a quick text. My whole team gets that, so we're usually pretty good at getting back to you fairly quickly. Or you can check us out online. Just Google Natalie Kratzer Thrivent and you'll find me and my team online. Or you can shoot us an email as well, natalie.kratzer@thrivent.com, or find us on social. I hang out in the community for CSPA on Facebook and all the other places too.
Yeah, awesome. And I'll make sure I post all this in the show notes, you guys. And I realize I actually have that number. Of course I have that number. I have like all your numbers. But yeah, thank you guys so much for tuning in. And I highly recommend to work with Natalie sooner than later. Especially like she said, if you know CRNA is your goal, the sooner you get started on the financial aspect of it, the less stressful your overall journey is going to be. Of course, though, I mean, anytime that you hear this message is reaching you, definitely, if you're worried about finances, reach out to Natalie. So thank you, Natalie, so much for your time. I appreciate you. And I look forward to continuing to just work together and work with our students. And thank you for all that you do.
Thank you. Good luck, guys.
Hey, future CRNA, as always, I appreciate you and your loyalty. Thank you so very much for tuning in this week. I'd love to hear from you, so screenshot this episode and share it to your IG stories with your biggest takeaway. Don't forget to tag me at CRNA School Prep Academy so I can personally thank you. Be sure to head over to CRNASchoolPrepAcademy.com to check out our blog and gather free resources to help you along your CRNA journey. Stay strong, and I'll see you next week.